Hey.
Hey, what do you want?
Can you give me access to the Kubernetes cluster?
No, go away. Let me ask you a question. What is the best way to give people access to a Kubernetes cluster, specific resources in that cluster, AWS accounts, databases, or any other parts of the system? Well, no one should have direct access to anything. We have pipelines, GitOps, Grafana, and a bunch of other tools that are very, very good at managing the system and provide insights into what's going on in that system. From there on, Argo CD, Flux, GitHub Actions, Jenkins, and any other tool will take care of the rest. If you need to know what's going on or to debug any issue, you can open Grafana, Jaeger, Prometheus, or any other observability tool. Giving you direct access to the system is a recipe for disaster. So, no human should have direct access to anything. Easy, right? Well, there is an exception. Sometimes things go terribly wrong. Sometimes things fail in a way that there is no other way to fix them but to enter the system and start poking it. We call that break glass scenario. Now, those scenarios are temporary in nature, and that means that access to the system should be temporary as well. And that's where we encounter problems. It's relatively easy to define users, groups, and roles in Kubernetes or AWS or any other system. The problem is that we cannot know in advance what will break, when it will break, and who will be the best person to fix it. We need to be capable of giving access to specific resources to specific people for a specific period of time, and we need to be able to do that fast. Break glass scenarios are time sensitive. There is an issue that cannot be fixed without direct access to the system, and it needs to be fixed now, right away. What we need for those scenarios is just-in-time access, and I think I have just the tool for that. Today we will explore Apono as a potential solution for managing just-in-time access to, well, anything. I'll start with Kubernetes, and you should know that Apono enables access to resources in quite a few other places and platforms and providers and almost anywhere. We'll get to those later. For now, I will start by creating access flow for accessing almost any namespace in a Kubernetes cluster. There's a name, there's always a name, we like naming stuff. Now, the flow itself starts with when. That is the opportunity to specify when and for whom access should be granted. It could be for individual users, groups, or any of the supported identity providers. Since this is a demo setup, I don't have other people nor groups defined, so I will be requesting access for myself, which is silly. But hey, you'll have to imagine that there are two me's, two versions of myself in this demo. There is one me, the person who defines who has access and for what, and there is some other me, a personification of anyone else who might need access to the system. Next, we can define one or more targets. In this case, I will select Kubernetes cluster and within it, say that I want to grant access to a namespace. Now, this is a bit confusing. I would expect this wizard to continue and ask me for permissions and other details, but it does not. It kicks me back to the main screen. Now, that doesn't matter. It's okay. And I should continue, right? So what should I do next? Yes, next I can define permissions. Since this is a Kubernetes cluster, I'm presented with roles I have in my Kubernetes cluster. Today, I feel generous, so I will select admin. Now, I don't really want to give people access to any namespace. What I really want is to say, hey, you can access any namespace except kubesystem and Apono connector. Those are out of the scope, while all the rest is in. Finally, the last step allows me to define how long that access should last. This is not a permanent access to the cluster. That's the important part. It's not permanent. This is a temporary, just-in-time access, and I will leave it to last for an hour. Finally, this setup is too generous to be given automatically. So I want to have the additional step of approving the request. I want to make those requesting it sweat a little bit. I want them to suffer. I want them to wait and wonder whether I will approve it or not. That makes me very powerful. It makes me feel like I am a godlike figure, right? That's important. And that's it. I can, and I will, click the Create Access Flow button, and my first access flow is now ready. It's waiting for the disaster to happen so that someone requests access to the system. Now, before we see action flows in action, let me create another, but this time a less generous one. This is what I really want. I want people to get a temporary access to specific resources in the namespace demo. Those specific resources are effectively all the resources except secrets. I do not want anyone to see confidential information, and everything else in the demo namespace is a fair game. Let's see whether I can accomplish just that. I will discard the screen that invites me to request permissions through Slack and click the big Create Access Flow button. Give it a name and select who can request access. That part is easy. The next step is a bit more problematic. I can define target resources in two ways. I can use Apono's interface to say you can access deployments, replica sets, pods, services, ingresses, and other resources except secrets. However, there is no option to say everything but this. So I have to specify explicitly what everything is. I need deployments, replica sets, pods, services, and ingresses. However, Apono chose to hard code, I know, ridiculous, which resources can be specified, and it does not have replica sets, it doesn't have services, and it doesn't have ingresses. I can only select deployments and pods. On top of that, specifying pods would be useless since Apono wants you to select specific pods, which is silly since pods are constantly created, deleted, and recreated in Kubernetes. So this is the first set of deficiencies of Apono. It cannot discover which resource definitions are available in a cluster, it does not account for dynamic nature of Kubernetes, and it does not understand parent-child relationships between resources. It should be enough to say, I want to give access to this deployment, and Apono should automatically give access to replica sets created by that deployment and pods created by those replica sets. So, does that mean that Apono is failing big time with Kubernetes? Well, no, not really. What it means is that it extended its scope into the wrong direction. There's probably no need for Apono to define roles. That part is easy, and I'm not sure I need Apono in the first place for just that. I need Apono to provide just-in-time access based on roles that are already defined by me. So that's what I'll do. I will tell Apono, hey, you manage access to a namespace. I already have permissions I want you to use, and those are defined as Kubernetes cluster role called no secrets. So let me search for roles that contain secret in their name. No. Apono thinks that those permissions do not exist, while I know that they do. So it's either Apono doesn't understand what's going on or I'm wrong, and I'm never wrong. The problem is that Apono refreshes its internal database every hour, or at least that's what I believe, periodically, let's say. And I created the role short while ago. The good news is that I can force Apono to refresh its database by clicking the refresh button. The bad news is that the button is not on this screen. So I will have to go to the integration screen where I added my cluster, select refresh, wait for a while, and go back to access flows. Now, I would expect the flow that I worked on to be saved so that I can continue working on it, but it's not on the list. I feel that I lost my work. So let me start over. Click the access flow button and, oh, it's there. It asks me whether I would like to return to my draft flow, and of course, I do. And now I can continue, but before I do, I must say that that was very poor user experience. I do not expect Apono to refresh continuously, even though that would be a great thing to do through Kubernetes webhooks. But what I do expect is to be able to refresh from screens where I need to refresh without going back and forth like crazy, like I'm a crazy person. Now, it's not a big deal though. So let's continue. If I remember where I was. I'm old, right? I forget things. Duration of my memory is now measured in seconds. So where was I? Oh yeah, permissions. Let me see whether I can find no secrets now. And it's there. So let me select it. And finally, those permissions should be applied to the demo namespace. And that's it. I created my second access flow. We'll test those access flows in a moment, just after I show you the permissions I defined in the role no secrets. Those are simple, and anyone working with Kubernetes should have no issue understanding them. I am allowing get, watch, and list operations on deployments, replica sets, pods, services, ingresses, and SQL claims. Secrets are not on that list, so no one granted those permissions will be able to see them. And now I can test those flows. Hey, Sarah, come back. I decided to give you the access to the cluster. You want it?
Not interested.
Okay, that means that I will have to pretend to be the person that needs access to the system because the other candidate left. Gone. She doesn't want to work with me. Anyways, one of the ways I can request access is through Apono app in Slack. So I will type /Apono and select to create a new request. And that brings me to a form where I can choose which type of a request I want to make. So let's say that I want to access the default and kubepublic namespaces and that I would like to have admin permissions. Now, to increase my chances of getting the access, I will write a very dramatic justification. The more dramatic the situation is, the more likely it is for someone to approve my request, right? Isn't that how enterprises operate? Now, that request falls into the first access flow that was set to require manual approval from some guy called Victor. So that guy, which happens to be me as well, gets a message asking to approve or deny the request. Now, since that guy is me, and given that I'm not a very nice person, I will deny the request. The end of the world is not justification big enough for me to turn into a nice guy. As a result, the person that requested access was rejected, and there is nothing he, the other me, can do but watch the world ending. Actually, maybe there is something he can do. The application that is causing the world to end is in the demo namespace, so he can try to request access to that one instead. Let's see how that goes. New request, demo namespace, no secrets permissions, justification, submit, and this time the request was approved automatically. It fell under the second access flow that was set to approve requests to specific people automatically. And now we can work on preventing the end of the world. First, I will define kubeconf variable. I feel it's cleaner if I do not pollute my default kubeconfig too much. Next, I will go back to Slack and click the access details button. Over there, I can see the commands that will hopefully generate kubeconfig I can use to connect to the cluster. So let me copy them all, paste them into the terminal, press the enter key, and it does not work. That's a pity. Fortunately, this is not the first time I use Apono, and I know that it does work, but only if commands are executed one by one. It's silly, I know, but it works that way. So copy the first one, paste it into the terminal, press the enter key, copy the second, paste it, enter, copy the third, paste it, enter, ignore the errors, keep going, copy the fourth, paste it, enter, ignore the recommendation to use --context in all future commands, and use kubectl.ctx to set the context. Now, the experience with the retrieval of kubeconfig was not great at all. However, that is not a problem. I do not think that it is Apono's responsibility to provide kubeconfig. You should have kubeconfig already. So the instructions how to generate it are just nice to have, even though it does not work well type of feature. What matters is that your access to a cluster, no matter how kubeconfig was generated, is controlled by Apono, or to be more precise, by whomever is managing access flows. You can think of kubeconfig for that cluster as being permanent, but the scope of what can be accessed with that config varies depending on which access flows are active and for how long. And right now, I got one of those access flows activated for an hour. Hence, I should have access limited to the demo namespace, and that access excludes secrets and quite a few other resource types. We can test that by listing all the nodes, denied. All the namespaces, denied. All the resources and ingresses and secrets without the namespace, meaning from the default namespace, denied. So far, so good. I cannot access anything outside of the scope of the roles used when giving me the access and the namespace to which the access is granted. And now, let's see whether I can see all the stuff that is inside the demo namespace. Well, I can see the resources that I'm allowed to see, and I got the message that I cannot retrieve the rest. That's how it should be. Now, if I limit myself to retrieving from the demo namespace only deployments, replica sets, pods, services, and ingresses, it works. Can I see the secrets? Nope. All in all, it works like a charm, and it will continue working for an hour, or at least an hour from the moment I was given access to that namespace. Now I can wait until that 1 hour expires to show that my access will be revoked automatically. But I'm not that patient. So I will switch my role from Victor, the person that tries to fix the world, to Victor, the mean one that likes denying people access to resources. Hence, I will speed up the process by revoking access right away. First, I'll take a look at the activity. We can see that Victor, the other Victor, was granted access not long ago. I can see the details of the request that was granted and the timeline. Now, the truth is that I do not like him, that other Victor. I don't like him at all. So let me revoke his access and make him suffer while trying to figure out how to solve the issue without the access to the system. Now, let me change roles once again. Now I am Victor that is disliked by other Victor, the masochist. Can I still access resources in the demo namespace? Nope. My access was revoked. I cannot access anything in the demo namespace anymore. There are two more important features of Apono you should be aware of. We have access flow bundles. They allow us to group resources and use those groups in access flows. I could create a bundle that combines a deployment with a namespace and, let's say, a cluster, and each of those can have different permissions. Further on, we can create access flows that use those bundles. However, I already commented that Apono does not work well with specific resources, given that it does not understand what you might have in your Kubernetes cluster, thus missing a number of resources, and also due to its inability to comprehend parent-child relationships between resources. Hence, I prefer defining those in my own roles and using Apono to manage access based on my own permissions. So, does that mean that bundles are not a good thing? Not at all. They are excellent, but for different use cases, and to understand those, we should take a look at Apono integrations. We can integrate Apono with AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, MongoDB, Kubernetes, which is what you saw so far, GitHub, and quite a few other providers and solutions. Then there are 4 identity providers, and finally Slack for requesting and approving access flows, which, by the way, can be requested through a plain URL as well. Now, besides the obvious use case of managing access to all those destinations, there is the one with bundles. While I might not be so positive or positive at all with bundles within the context of a single destination, like in my case, Kubernetes, they're very, very, very useful when combining multiple providers. Let's say that you have an application running in Kubernetes and connected to a Postgres database running in AWS as RDS. That would be a great candidate for a bundle. We could combine the two into a bundle and use that bundle in an access flow. And that is awesome. Finally, there is pricing. I have no idea how much it costs. It's free to start using it, but there is no pricing page. I tried to find it in the menu of their site. I searched for it in the docs. I looked for it in the app itself, and I even tried to Google for it. There's nothing, or at least nothing I could find. So I cannot say how much it costs and whether the price is fair, except that there is a free version, which is the one I am using. Now, let's switch to pros and cons and see whether Apono is a good solution for managing just-in-time access to Kubernetes. Whether Apono is a good or not so good solution depends on what we consider its scope to be. We'll get to the discussion of the scope in a moment. For now, let's list all the bad and after that, all the good things. And we'll start with bad things, with cons. And the first one is that Apono's mechanism to create kubeconfig is just silly and it is not working well. Do we need that feature? Probably not, assuming that Apono is not an identity provider. So that's not great, but only if you consider Apono to be an identity provider, which I don't think it is. So I'm not even sure why we have that feature. Next, Apono does not understand Kubernetes. Kubernetes is dynamic and no vendor can know what you have in your cluster. Yet, Apono hard-coded a few resource definitions instead of discovering them. Similarly, Apono does not understand parent-child relationships between resources, nor that many resources are created and deleted dynamically, and that it would be foolish to try to manage access to some specific resources like, for example, bots. What else? Oh yeah, there is no CLI, there is no operator, and there is no API, at least not publicly available in the documentation unless those are well hidden. Now, that statement is only partially true. Apono does have a CLI and an API, but those are limited to requesting access and listing requests and integrations and a few other things. It does not enable us to create and manage access flows and bundles, which are arguably the most important features of Apono. We cannot define them and store them in Git. We cannot do anything with them but to use them or define them through the UI. That might work for some, but it might also not work for others. And finally, Apono is SaaS only, software as a service. There is no self-managed option. Personally, I am all in on SaaS, but that might be problematic for some companies, especially when security-related tools are in question. As for pros, the good things, there is only one, but a big one. Apono focuses on temporary access and it does it well, really well. And I like tools that are specialized and result in being very, very, very good at one thing. Apono is one of those tools. Hence, I do not have a list of pros beyond this one item. It manages just-in-time access to resources well. Now, let's get back to the scope. What is Apono? If it is a tool that manages just-in-time access to resources and it assumes that you already have permissions and roles set up, then it is a great tool. If what we are looking for is a way to grant temporary access to a person or a group of people, and that access is using our own rules and permissions, and people already have their config files like, for example, kubeconfig, in that case, Apono is great. And my only complaint is that it is UI only, graphical user interface only, at least for the things that matter. On the other hand, if you would like to use Apono to also manage permissions and roles and other things, in that case, it is not yet mature in those areas. Maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe it is overstretching its scope. Personally, all I need from Apono is to manage just-in-time access to resources, and that access to use permissions and roles and what's or not created and managed by me and completely independently of Apono. For that scope, Apono is a great tool, and it would be even better if it would have a proper API. Try it out. Let me know what you think. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one. Cheers.